Good afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome this Wednesday, 21st of September, European Day of Action Against Islamophobia. I'm Mark Guy, and I'm the part-time director of the European Network on Religion and Belief, a small organisation with a base in Brussels. Based in Brussels. We're all working from our home still. And doing lots of work online, as I'm sure you are. So European Day of Action Against Islamophobia, to correspond with the International Day in March, I think that's the 15th of March. We were very fortunate to have Farid there actually on the International Day Against Islamophobia in March of this year. So welcome to him and his other colleagues, Amani and Anna, who we've just met just before this meeting started, and hopefully Enes is somewhere there, but it's sometimes difficult to find. You are, sorry, yes, I think I've seen Enes as well. So we've got the chat. Please use it and say hello and who you are, any organisation that you're working with. Today is about connection and having some sort of meaningful dialogue between us all as colleagues in a collegiate way. Obviously, we're hoping this is a safe space where people feel that they can say what they want to say. Obviously, anything that's inappropriate or racist or hostile, we will not allow, and I think you would expect that. And we're not looking at that happening today. We are recording the event, and we'll then, hopefully you're all happy with that because you probably clicked that when you came into the room, hopefully. And we will then make this available, this recording, to other people that obviously can't be with us this afternoon. And actually, when we were organising this with Farid, and I think we were organising it for early September, it's fortuitously turned into this particular day. I didn't know the report was going to be so hot off the press, I should say, as it's turned out to be. And we've only seen the report possibly about an hour ago now, and haven't had a chance to read the many pages that are in that report around focusing on the countries across Europe. So I think it's important that we say that we haven't had an advance copy or notice of that report. It really is out today, so this is its kind of launch meeting. We said in the message that went out, please, if you feel that comfortable enough to keep the camera on and being, and feel that sense of engagement, and I can see people are doing that, and that's a really lovely thing. Then that would be terrific, because we really do want to create a network across Europe to further dialogue and conversations. Do take a look at our website. I'll just very briefly just say what we're about. We're a network, a European network to promote mutual understanding, collaboration and common action between religious and non-religious groups. And we work collaboratively in partnership with a lot of different organisations. At the moment, United Religions Initiative, with ENORB, who I'm sure many of you know, with CCIE, with them this morning. So we work collaboratively in partnership. We're looking at partnerships. And if you have ideas or proposals for collaboration, please do contact me. And we want to work with faith and belief and anti-racist-based civil society organisations and their leaders to combat racial and religious discrimination, hate crimes and community harms. And clearly Islamophobia is one of those, and we've been really exercised about that over the last, over many years actually, and all before I arrived. So we want to create a network which aims to strengthen mutual understanding and harmony in the field of religion and belief, and promote safer and more resilient community responses. So we want to be the solution to some of the problems that we see in front of us in Europe and across the world. So come and join with us. Do look at the website. Come and become a member. Even consider giving us a donation. We get support from the Open Society Foundations, very generously support us, and individual donations and grants. But we always need money and support for our work. The format today is that Farid and Enes are going to be talking about the state of Islamophobia, and that's obviously reflecting back on 2021, but probably will bring it up to speed where we are in 2022. And then and they will talk for maybe 10-15 minutes. And then their colleagues, Amani, Hassani, will be talking about the Danish focus, and Anna Ardin will be talking about the situation in Sweden. So we think that will take about 35 minutes, and they'll be talking to my colleague, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, Sadia. And then we'd like to open it all up. So, you know, think of your questions, put your questions in the chat. We want that, there's going to be a roughly 50 minutes until the end of this, where people can make their comments and their observations and their questions to the four presenters that we've got in the room. And we are thrilled to have them with us this afternoon, we really are. So I'm going to just quickly introduce Sadia. Sadia Akram, who I've worked with for many, many years, based in Manchester, and also the coordinator of FODIT, which is the Forum on Discussion of Israel and Palestine. So we've worked closely over several years on her work there, but in other work, supporting groups in the UK in particular. So Sadia, can I pass over to you?
Yes, thank you so much, Mark. So yeah, I'm Sadia Akram. I am the Programme Director for FODIP, which is a registered UK charity. And our focus really, it's called Forum for Discussion of Israel and Palestine. It says it in the name really, where its remit is really to host and facilitate sensitively interfaith dialogue on the Israeli-Palestinian issue within and between Jews, Christians, Muslims and others in the UK, to promote cooperation through dialogue. And also work with civil society consulting as an associate. So I'm really pleased to be here today. Thank you, Mark, and thank you so much, ENORB, for hosting today's webinar, particularly for using this opportunity to highlight the rising concerns among many of us and faith and civil society organisations about the development and expansion of Islamophobia that we're witnessing, resulting really in anti-Muslim hatred in and across Europe and beyond, I think. We are very, very fortunate and extremely delighted to have us join with us today, Dr. Farid Hafez and Dr. Enes Bayraklı. I'm not sure if I've pronounced your name correctly, and apologies if I have not. Both co-editors, and we have two co-authors with us today, Amani Hassani from Denmark and Anna Ardin from Sweden. Again, really, really delighted to have you here to present their latest volume of the European Islamophobia Report, which has been published by the Leopold Weiss Institute. I guess this is probably the 6th edition, so I think the first edition may have been in 2015, I might be wrong, but I'm sure you'll correct me. So you're all very, very welcome. The first half hour, as Mark said, will be Farid, Enes, Anna and Iman talking through what their findings are. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Farid Hafez, who was born in Austria, a political scientist and now based in the USA, visiting professor of international studies at Williams College, a non-resident senior researcher at Georgetown University's Bridge Initiative of the School of Foreign Service. He is the founding editor of the German English Islamophobia Studies Yearbook since 2010, and the co-editor of the annual European Islamophobia Report, which we will discuss more today, which has been going since 2015 and has covered more than 30 countries. So over to you, Farid.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you, ENORB, for facilitating this event today. Thank you, Mark and Sadia and everybody else who is on the team here for making this happen today. basically what we are doing here is something that we have been doing now since, I think it's now 8 years now. So this is the 7th report that has been just published today. And just to give like kind of a background information, like looking back into 2014 and how the world and Europe was back then, we very often, when we would go give talks, and especially when we were speaking to NGOs, anti-racist NGOs, Muslim NGOs that were speaking out against and about Islamophobia, we realized there was always this issue. If you want to give yourself a voice and criticize something, there was always this idea of coming from the political side, from the policymakers, those empowered, MPs. Well, where is the data? So it was a very simple idea back then in 2015 when Enes and me met, that we said, okay, let's create the data. Because obviously you have several European institutions that have been producing reports about Islamophobia once in a while, every 5-6 years or something like that. But we said, okay, let's create something that is continuously providing information about the state of the art and the development of Islamophobia based on an annual report. So this is how the idea was born. So if you look back and look to all the different editions from 2015 to 2021 now, what you will see is that every and each report basically has the same structure. But you can clearly see in our introduction on Europe and the overall picture that we are painting that there is some emphasis that we pay on certain specific developments. So looking back, for instance, to last year's report, which was the report where we put Emmanuel Macron on the cover page, the first time that we did like one specific figure that we tried to highlight as a symbol of what was going on in 2021, we emphasized that there is a huge problem in terms of how some hawkish policies have been implemented to basically destroy the Muslim civil society, and with the example of France. Now, this year we put the image of Sebastian Kurz, because again, we are seeing that institutionalized Islamophobia coming from the centers of power have been crucial in shaping the destiny and the lives of so many Muslim people, especially the organized Muslim community and or those who are vocal and about Islamophobia in specific. So this is kind of, the background. For this year, we were happy to have 35 scholars and colleagues from civil societies to work on 27 European countries. We had better days when we covered, I think 34 was the utmost number of countries that we had covered in the past. And there is obviously a lot of things going on when we talk about Islamophobia. So let's start with the good news, okay? So the good news is, I believe that the United Nations has unanimously accepted a resolution to declare the 15th of March, which is the day when the Christchurch attack happened, as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. And I think that is a huge success. Why? Because on a symbolic level, and we know that from a lot of European countries, we have those who still deny the very existence of Islamophobia, who try, when you speak out against Islamophobia, to tell you, well, this notion, this terminology is not really defined, so why should we really use that? Having these kinds of arguments in order not to have the real discussion about the things that are on the table that really shape Muslim lives on a daily basis. So I think this is something good, something we should also work with as civil society organizations, as academics, to draw on that success in the United Nations. And I think the important aspect, again, is it has been accepted unanimously. At the same time, what we see, if you go to the website of the United Nations, the only 3 actors that were really discussing this issue, one was India, and I think there is no, I don't have to explain why. if you look at what the current Modi regime is doing to Muslims in India. But the other two actors were France and the representative of the European Union. And I think that again tells you something, right? As to how much top leaders in Europe have problems. And again, I think it very much shows that France had been at the forefront of not protecting Muslims against Islamophobia, but really institutionalizing Islamophobia. So that we also put that in the context of a general trend that we see in Europe. So we have quoted a lot from the University of Gothenburg's research called The Varieties of Democracy, which has found that generally speaking, there is a lot of European countries, especially in the East, but not only in the East, have major issues when it comes to what they call liberal democracy. One country where I come from, Austria, has been even downgraded from being a liberal democracy to becoming an electoral democracy. But even in Western European countries, this research project has highlighted that there is a slight increase in domestic government disinformation on behalf of Western European governments. And I think we have to see this whole trend of an increasing Islamophobia as being part and parcel of a larger trend of a growing authoritarian and autocratic policies that we can observe throughout Europe in general. All right. So I'm coming to my last point, which is again, why we chose Sebastian Kurz as on the cover of this year's report. We see that there is a number of what we call the champions of institutionalized Islamophobia, which is, according to our analysis and the analysis that was provided by authors like Amani and Anna and others in the respective country reports, there are a number of countries that are pushing these agendas and trying to hegemonize it on a European level. They try to basically convince other European countries that this is the right way to treat Muslims, to put it very simply. And that is, amongst others, besides France, which I have already mentioned, it is Austria. And we have given a lot of evidence here in terms of why that is the case. You can see there are attempts on a European level, like for instance, last October, we had the Vienna Forum on Countering Segregation and Extremism in integration in Vienna, where people from Denmark, France, and unfortunately also the EU counterterrorism coordinator participated. Which was basically an attempt, as Rab put it in her own words, quote unquote, to make Vienna a competent center against political Islam. Now, the problem with political Islam here is not so much that it is about a problematic phenomenon, but political Islam is basically any kind of Muslim visibility in the public space. Like the Austrian government has banned the hijab, has closed mosques, and has made the infamous Operation Luxor police raid, the largest police raid in the history of modern Austria, to which I also fell victim. All of that being presented as a means to fight political Islam. So it is not really about something that is violent, but rather very explicitly all of these policymakers and the theologians and extremism experts that are trying to legitimize these policies, they very explicitly say this is not about violence, it is about what comes before violence, it is about thought, it is about ideas that we are tackling. And I think the last measure is one of the laws that has been implemented here in Austria, which was to basically make political Islam a criminal offense that has been part of a larger package of so-called anti-terrorism legislation that again has curtailed a lot of civil liberties that we have in countries like Austria. And all of these tendencies, I think, are very, very problematic and show us, like, you know, where this whole journey leads some countries who opt for fighting political Islam in the name of anti-terrorism. So I will stop here and give the floor to Enes to speak about some other general trends that we have been observing in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Farid. Anas, you're an associate professor and chair of the Political Science and International Relations Department at the Turkish-German University in Istanbul, and co-editor of the European Islamophobia Report, and we are really excited to hear more from you. You'd need to just unmute yourself. Still can't hear you.
Yes, now working. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to also thank ENORB for organizing this meeting and giving us a chance to present our report. And I would like to thank also all the authors who contributed to this report this year. Amani and Anna, today they are with us. So as Farid mentioned in the beginning, he emphasized that mostly politicians and the politics plays a huge role in the spread of Islamophobia. So we don't think that it's an automatic progress or it's a response. What happens in the Muslim world, or because of some terror attacks, this is all happening. But we think that there is a driving force behind all this Islamophobia campaign, and the politics is the main responsible, or the politicians are the main responsible culprits in this. And I will try to summarize what we have done also in the introduction, because the report is very, it's huge. I mean, 27 country reports. But in the introduction, we are trying to give an overall picture. And I will try to pick up some interesting examples from different countries and from different fields, so that we have an overall picture what is going on or what has happened in 2021 in Europe. So one example from politics field, and we can give as an example what has happened in France and what is happening in France. And that's why also Farid mentioned we have put Emmanuel Macron on the cover picture last year. And also our author, Kevser Necip, he describes the essential core of institutionalized Islamophobia in France as follows. Islamophobia in France is primarily the result of state, which seeks to establish an Islam of France, which removes self-determination from French Muslims to make them Muslims without Islam. So that's we see that the state has a policy, unfortunately, in Islam, which is driving the whole Islamophobia in France context. Secondly, of course, far-right parties, and that we have been emphasizing this for a long time now, and also other experts all around Europe, that the far-right is becoming more and more mainstream and dictating the narrative of the mainstream parties, shaping the narrative of the mainstream parties. And the theory of great replacement and the anxiety around the demise of the white civilization is the driving idea in the discourse of many far-right politicians. And it has also made in the mainstream discourse, unfortunately. The Norwegian leader of the far-right Progress Party has complained that, for instance, Muslims are able to celebrate Eid al-Fitr, seeing in it the deletion of one's own culture and traditions. Far-right political parties, such as the Dutch Party for Freedom, were able to bring in discriminatory motions that were accepted by governing coalitions of the center-right parties. The majority of the parliament in the Netherlands decided that the special investigating officers could no longer wear a hijab as part of their uniform, arguing that this was in conflict with the job's neutrality. That happened in 2021, of course. And similarly, in Spain, politicians of the far-right folks called Muslims a threat to Christian culture. In countries such as Finland, conservative political parties like the National Coalition Party have no issues in forming a coalition with the far-right parties such as the Finns Party, and have already co-opted the anti-Muslim policy claims of the radical far-right. The internet plays a huge role in the spread of Islamophobia, and this we have seen also in times of COVID pandemic that the hate speech has moved to online space, and there was an increase in the hate speech in the internet in these 2 years, 2020 and 2021. The Italian Observatory on Rights, which analyzed tweets posted between January and October 2021, found that among the almost 700,000 tweets analyzed, almost 20% targeted Muslims, an increase of 12% compared to 2022. And the numbers of Muslims should be around, I mean, the percentage of Muslims should be around 4 and 5%, I think, in Italy. So 20% is quite a huge number. So another report on hate speech conducted by Amnesty International, which surveyed 36,000 contents published online, found that 46 of original posts and tweets were classified as anti-Muslim. So almost half of them were anti-Muslim. According to research, when it comes to labor market, 35% of Muslim immigrants have experienced discrimination in job applications in Norway. And job applicants with an ethnic or Norwegian name were shown to be 25% more likely to be invited to a job interview compared to equally qualified applicants with a Pakistani name on their CV. So media sometimes, and here I would like to also mention a positive example, can play an important role by investigating and uncovering problematic structures, such as the case of Dutch newspaper NRC uncovering the illegal surveillance of Muslims with government money. It was revealed that in the Netherlands, illegal surveillance of mosques occurred in at least 10 municipalities within the past couple of years with the purpose of producing secret reports. NRC exposed that this research was paid for by the National Coordinator for Counterterrorism and Security under the responsibility of the Ministry of Justice and Security. And education is another field that Muslims are facing discrimination. Education can be one of many means to counter Islamophobia, but can also be used for the opposite, that is the nurture for a future generation that holds on the stereotypes against Muslims. Structural barriers that many Muslim minorities face by administrative bodies is an even more problematic phenomenon. In Slovenia, for instance, a country which is off the radar for most of us, and there is only a tiny Muslim population there, Muslims have been trying to establish a private elementary school since 2014, a right enjoyed by other religious communities, but practically out of sight for Muslims. In justice system, there were also some unfortunately negative developments all around Europe for Muslims. In April 2021, the German parliament passed the act on the regulation of the appearance of civil servants and on the amendment of the other service regulations. The plenary waved it through without discussion, even though it included features of appearance with religious or ideological connotations, which can be restricted and prohibited if they are objectively capable of impairing trust in the neutral conduct of the office by the civil servant. The decision of the European Court of Justice in 2021 that employers may prohibit their employees from wearing visible signs of political, ideological, or religious beliefs in the workplace under narrow circumstances could also exacerbate the already unfavorable employment situation of covered Muslim women. And I would like to also mention some policy recommendations that we have put in our introduction. And of course, I would like to mention here also that each country report has its own specific country-specific policy recommendations. For that, you have to look in that country report, but these are general policy recommendations. And the conclusions that we see, what we see is Islamophobia is becoming normalized and institutionalized by liberal democracies such as Austria, Denmark, and France in Europe. And this is an alarming development. While the Macron government is continuing with its crackdown on Muslim associations and mosques, many of the measures taken and laws implemented by the Austrian government, previous Austrian government and also today's, have been largely defeated by the justice system in Austria. And of course, this is a welcoming development. So we urge European countries to bring life and energy to the most recent and unanimously accepted resolution of the United Nations, declaring March 15th as International Day to combat Islamophobia. We urge European institutions, especially the member states of the Council of Europe, to take the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance General Policy Recommendation number 5 on preventing and combating anti-Muslim racism and discrimination seriously and implement it. The recommendations should also be included in the various national action plans of European Union member states. European and national institutions should take the findings of the European Union's Agency for Fundamental Rights as presented in the Directive 2017/441 on combating terrorism, impact on fundamental rights and freedoms seriously, and recognize the damage of anti-terrorism legislation on Muslim communities across Europe. So these are main general recommendations that we have summarized for this year. And on that note, I would like to finish my presentation, and then we can maybe continue with the questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Enes. That was most helpful. I wonder, before we take questions for both of you, whether we have Amani, Hassani talk a bit about her research, and then have Anna talk about the research that she's done also in Sweden. So Amani, Hassani is a sociologist and research director at the Center for Muslims' Rights in Denmark. So you've co-authored the report from around Denmark, a Danish NGO that seeks to raise awareness and address Islamophobia in Denmark. So really interesting to hear your perspective and the work that you've done on the report that you've co-authored on Denmark.
Thank you, Sadia. Thank you for that nice introduction, and thank you to Farid and Enes for summing up this year's Islamophobia report. I think for the chapter that I wrote on Denmark, I wanted to just briefly give a quick summary of some of the things that, as I was writing this, were really stark to me as someone who actually works and researches the Danish case. And I think I wanted to start off this year's report. I've written the last 2 years' report as well. This year's report, I've noticed certain tendencies and certain developments, as was highlighted in Farid and Enes's talk. There's certain things that are being replicated across European member states and European nations, and I think that's where I want to kind of highlight some of the unique things about Denmark, but how we can kind of think about the way it replicates things, even in the UK, how things in the UK are kind of being transformed in the Danish context to fit within a Danish rhetoric, political rhetoric. One thing that I found really, really important to highlight in this year's report was this new statistical political category that the government, the Danish government, has kind of developed, which focuses on the way it's being called. So in Denmark, usually in policies to kind of avoid not mentioning people's religious background, non-Western has been used as a substitute to kind of figure out which people are most likely to be Muslim. Now, in late 2020, the government came up with a new category to even specify it even further, which focuses on Middle East, North Africa, Pakistan, and Turkey as these countries to specify people's backgrounds to be able to kind of read out their religious background. So to get around the general European prohibition on registering the religious background of its citizens, Denmark has created this very unique statistical category, which will allow policymakers, which will allow politicians to use statistical information and registration on each citizen to develop laws that really can be much more focused and targeting Muslims. And I start off in my introduction with this highlighting this, because I think it really paves the way of where our conversation in the Danish case really needs to go. We need to move away from looking at Islamophobia as merely hate crime, as an individual bias and racism, but actually look at how it's being perpetuated in political rhetoric and structures, and then how that trickles down to everyday life, affecting Muslim and non-Muslims intersubjective relationships. So one thing that came out of my research on this for this year's report, there's one thing that kind of took me to a different direction, which looks at citizenship laws. Now, in 2021, the Institute for Human Rights in Denmark came out with a report in early 2021, with a report highlighting how many non-Western, not just immigrants, but descendants of immigrants struggle to gain Danish citizenship. And most of these are Muslim, have a Muslim background because of immigration patterns. So they demonstrate how this really curbs the political agency of non-Western citizens in Denmark, because Denmark is already one of the harshest countries to gain citizenship in. So they've reformulated citizenship laws. So when you're born in Denmark, you no longer automatically receive Danish citizenship if your parents are not Danes. You have to apply for it, and if you can't apply for it if your parents are not Danish until you're 18. Now, in the same year, in 2021, after this report was published, where the Institute of Danish Human Rights really highlighted the repercussions of this for a large group of minorities in Denmark, for a large group of non-Western racialized Muslims as well, the Danish government decided to change citizenship laws to make them even more difficult to gain. So now we have a context, we have a situation where Danes, descendants of migrants, born and raised in Denmark, are in their late 30s, and because they've been studying and because they haven't had full-time employment for 3 to 4 years, are struggling to get citizenship. What then happens is their children are born into this pattern, and there's a heightened discrimination for people who were born and raised in Denmark, in the fact that they can't gain citizenship easily because of their non-Western heritage. Now, with this new category of MINAPT, which focuses on Muslim majority countries, making that even more specific, it makes it easier. We don't know what's going to happen in the next few years, but it makes it easier for the government to stipulate that we need to pay attention on how many Muslims gain citizenship in Denmark, to regulate it. So it's said in the political rhetoric, it's said in the discourse, but once you get down to policy level, it needs to be able to be approved by the Danish Constitution and European human rights laws. So, but in the general public, everyone is well aware of who is referred to when we speak about non-Westerners, and now even more specific when we speak about MINAPT citizens, which is quite literally Muslims, because they've removed Israel, Eritrea, and Ethiopia from the calculations because they're not Muslim majority countries. Now in 2022, you already see Denmark's Statistics Denmark, which is the Danish statistical institution, already highlighting the difference between Western migrants, non-Western migrants, and MINAPT migrants, and looking at the how many of them are gaining citizenship, how many of them are in employment, and so on. So it really allows the government to be more direct in their discrimination of Muslims. A part of this is also trickling down into education, the field of education. So in schools now, the conversation in 2021 was about limiting the amount of schools, the amount of racialized minorities, particularly Muslims, and this was verbalized in the political conversations. Muslims should not be more than 30% of a school population. So they've been discussing on how to scatter Muslim students in secondary schools. This has meant that a number of secondary schools had to close for their enrollment for an entire year to balance out how many Muslim students they have in their schools, which is a huge deal for the kids who were in that catchment area, who were supposed to go to that school but now have to actually commute to a further away school with much less racialized minorities and much less a number of Muslims there. And one more thing I wanted to highlight before I end is how this also affects housing policies. Now, Denmark has become infamous for its ghetto policies, which had in 2018 meant that a number of families living in neighborhoods with more than 50% non-Westerners were at risk of being evicted from their homes. Now in 2021 and continuing on to 2022, the evictions have started. But the evictions is just one part of it. Part of it is also regulating where the children of these residents attend schools, regulating how many minorities are in these schools, and then trying to scatter them across outside of their catchment. Now, in 2021, the government came out with a development of this policy, which now focuses on neighborhoods with 30% non-Western residents, and it allows municipalities to discriminate between applicants of housing and to refer housing applicants, and these are common housing applicants, comparable to social housing in the UK or but much broader. So a lot more people live in social housing in Denmark or common housing in Denmark. So they're then being referred to private housing associations instead of the public ones. Again, this is really in this year's report, I really tried to emphasize a bit more on non-Westerners as a category, because the development in Denmark is that they're going to develop Islamophobic policies using interchanging between non-Western and Minapt citizens. So by using Minapt as a category, they're really highlighting that we're trying to focus on Muslim citizens and regulate their behavior, regulate where they go to school, regulate their housing policies. And I think, just to sum up, these are like some of the stark developments that I noticed in 2021. Just to sum up on a more positive note, I think it's also important to say that on a civil society level, there's been a lot more collaboration. There's been a heightened attention to not just racism in general, but also Islamophobia, and how this really connects to how the government and politicians really use Muslims as a scapegoat to introduce very authoritative, very controlling surveillance towards the minorities in the countries, Muslim minorities in particular, but also generally racialized minorities. So refugees and asylum seekers are really struggling to gain permanent settlement, if not citizenship. And I think that's there's a question right in the chat asking about Muslim schools in Denmark, and I think this is continuously a developing issue. The education system in Denmark, the reason why politicians are talking about the number of Muslims and minorities in state schools is because that's where they can actually regulate it more directly, but Muslim schools are increasingly receiving less funding and increasingly being surveilled a lot more, with the potential of trying to Maya, I think with that, I spoke a little bit over my time, so I'll let Anna over to you, Sadia.
Thank you, Amani. Absolutely alarming, to be honest. I mean, I often speak to Mark about what the landscape is in Europe, but actually hearing you today, Amani, is you know, has been quite alarming for me. I do have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask, but before I do, I think I will still ask Anna to give you the microphone as it is, Anna, to talk a bit about what you found. Anna is a PhD student at the Centre for Civil Society Research, and I do not know how to pronounce the second part of this, the name of the university, Anna, so I'm going to allow you to do that. And you're the Secretary of the Network for Research on Islamophobia and a spokesperson for the Swedish Committee Against Anti-Muslim Racism, and you've co-authored the report on the Swedish findings in Sweden. So hand it over to you, Anna, but please do let us know the name of the university.
Yeah, it's they actually changed, our name before was Ersta Sköndal Bräcke, and they changed to make it more internationally available, and they changed it to Marie Cederschiöld, so I don't think they succeeded.
No, I still couldn't pronounce it.
But well, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you very much. My two other spokespersons from the committee that we started a year ago, a little more, is also here, so it's very nice to see that you came. And I'm also a deacon in the Uniting Church of Sweden, but I'm currently doing my PhD, and I'm writing about civic space and the expanding controls that the Swedish state is imposing on the civil society in different ways. And particularly, I'm looking at something called the democracy criteria. It's a regulation that will be used to control that organizations are democratic. And what we have seen so far is that it's only Muslim organizations, basically, who are considered not being democratic, even though we have seen that they have, when they have done deeper investigations of the organizations, they have found that they are very important for democracy, for including excluded, marginalized people, etc. But they still, according to these criteria, they are not democratic. There are suspicions of them not being democratic. A lot of debate articles and opinion pieces that claim that they are not democratic. And so the suspicion many times is enough to defund these organizations. So that is one of the reasons why I was one of the ones writing this report, since I've been very alarmed on what's going on. We write about this in the report as well, if you would like to read it. And then the reason I mentioned that I'm a deacon is that if you are a deacon, you make a holy promise to stand on the side of the oppressed as a follower of Jesus and so on, leader in the church. And myself, I was very long engaged in the LGBT movement, and many good things have happened in Sweden in this particular political spectrum in the LGBT movement. We have succeeded in changing the legislation. We have much more acceptance in society, rainbow certifications in churches. And then if you look at the Muslim community, things are getting the exactly opposite direction. It's getting worse by the day, I would say. So it's not that the rights are going hand in hand. It's like they're splitting up the different rights that were like very 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I started engaging in politics, it was like all the rights were one unit, and now it's not anymore. So I think that's important to see how you are singling out the Muslim community very much, and this is what we have researched, of course, or investigated in this report. We see that media is describing Muslims even more negatively than before. The political discussions are more intense in limiting freedom of religion for Muslims particularly. And we have seen more violent attacks as a consequence on mosques, on women wearing hijab in public space and so. And we also have seen that overtly racist publications are now getting state funds. Before, I mean, the criteria for democracy is increased in the civil society sphere, but it hasn't changed for the press. But still, these organizations or these publications that were out of the question before, they are now getting funds. And so that is, making the public debate very different. It's very much hate in the public space, I would say. But we are focused, just as Amani was saying, on the policy-making levels, not the events, because that is not really showing. I mean, there's a fluctuation. Sometimes there's more violence, sometimes there's less. But in one way, I would say that these violent attackers, they don't really need to attack the mosques anymore with the violence or attack people in the public space, because you're doing it through institutions instead, and that is much more efficient, and that can limit a person's lives much more than just the violence in the public space. So we had political elections for parliament last week in Sweden, and the campaigns were horrible, the worst I've ever seen in this regard. It was a lot of focus on criminal violence and migration, and actually connecting these two. And both the fascist party, the Sweden Democrats, the conservative, two conservative parties that we have, the Liberal Party and the Social Democrats, were actually talking about solving criminality with stopping migration and stopping funding to ethnic and religious minorities as well. So this is actually like a solution to other problems, like stopping fundings for organizations that are evaluated to be important on the contrary. So the fact doesn't really matter. And a consequence of this political exclusion, I would say, is a new party that have many Muslim representatives called Nuance. And they got up to 30% of the votes in a district in Malmö, and over 10% in districts in Stockholm, and they got 0.5% of the votes nationally. So that's a very small party, but still it's been very fierce attacks on them, and a lot of the debate in the media and the social media is around this party. And they themselves claim that they're not a Muslim party, but they address Islamophobia, and they have been largely labeled Islamists and dangerous people who wants to cause a civil war, etc. And my analysis of this is what happens when you address Islamophobia, especially when you are Muslim, but also as me when you're not a Muslim. I get that almost every day that I'm an Islamist. So this Islamist term has become a very flexible term that can mean Muslim, or very often means Muslim. It's like no difference between Islamist and Muslim. And on the other side, it can mean a criminal, violent extremist. And so from Muslim to criminal violence, there's really like no functional difference many times. When the Christian Democratic Party leader in the election campaign said that when the Danish hate mongler Rasmus Paludan was visiting Sweden and causing a lot of trouble, there was violent riots. And then the Christian Democrat Party leader said that she was asking why we didn't have 100 wounded Islamists. And it wasn't Islamists that were doing the riots, it was youth in the suburb, probably many Muslims, but they were not like ideologically organized or anything like that. But by using that term, you are saying that any Muslim that made this riot is an Islamist, and therefore it's Islam causing these riots. So that is like the talk has been evolved in this way. And we have had a lot of debate, like 10 years ago or before, a big debate that we shouldn't go the Danish way. that the Social Democrats in Denmark were leading the way to a more racist and authoritarian direction, and the Swedish Social Democrats were protesting against this. But now this has actually happened in Sweden too, I would say. I used to be a Social Democrat until these elections, basically. But there is one big difference between Sweden and Denmark, and with many other countries in Europe as well, which is that our big right-wing party is not populist. It's they're much more ideological. They have a pretty hardcore ethno-national ideology. The Sweden Democrats were founded by veterans from SS, from Nazi Germany, and they have been very overtly Nazi before, and now they're toning that down. But they come from the white supremacist movement, and they got over 20% of the votes. So that's the world's biggest Nazi-inspired party that we actually, in a few elections, suddenly have in Sweden that we didn't have before. And their sort of unique selling point is the harsh policies against Muslims. And the other parties is sort of buying into that. They are also, like, they see that white working class men are voting for this, and they all try to compete to get these votes. So they are also, even though they don't have these opinions, they are promoting these ideas, giving them a right, and leaving Muslims out. It's very difficult to be a Muslim in politics because you get all these accusations. I also want to highlight this, that Farid said in the beginning. I think you called them the champions of institutionalized Islamophobia. We have in our report called them the thought leaders. They're academics and journalists, basically a very small group who have very tight relationship with Lorenzo Vidino from Austria, who has been very central in Austria. And they also have the support of a particular state agency, the Agency for Psychological Defense. And they have many projects, reports, writing conspiracy theories about Muslim and Muslim organizations. And they're really, several reports are very, very low academic quality and very strong ideological opinions on how Muslims are. And this comes from a state agency, which is something that is really interesting, but it's also really difficult. This is the authority that is actually supposed to protect us from conspiracy theories, and they are the ones spreading it about Muslims. It makes it very difficult to address, because you yourself is seen as a conspiracy theorist if you highlight it. So it's and they were actually a part of the contingencies agency, but now they have become their own agency, very strategically important for the counter-jihad movement, or the movement promoting Islamophobia. And we can see, I think it's very interesting that both Amani and Farid has highlighted that you can see similarities between the different countries of how they operate. And it's not only coincidences or that they're learning from each other, but it's actually the same people that are sitting in the different countries, so experts in each other's projects. And it's not such a big group. And it's helped us a lot that the Bridge Initiative has started to describe this network and describe the people that are in it, because we can see the patterns that is happening here as well. It's in Sweden, I think there were no more than a handful of persons when they started pushing this after a few years after the Arab Spring. And my point here is that if they can change the course of history, so can we. They were just a few people, and we are a few people. We have heard so many times that this is a trend all over Europe. This is like a wave that is flowing, but it's actually very specific persons with specific strategies that are doing this. And so we are trying to do a little bit the same. We started this committee against Islamophobia in Sweden, and we're 3 spokespersons. We have anonymous persons too, because it's very dangerous for your personal career and everything to speak about these issues and speak about like being more into detail. And we also summoned 25 researchers and PhD students who are working on researching Islamophobia, and just the idea that Islamophobia exists is a bit controversial. So we're writing this book on Islamophobia in Sweden today, with a focus on Sweden and from different research angles. And we are very happy that we have the network of you with us as well, and that we see that there is actually networks forming in different European countries. And it looks a little bit dark right now, but I think that this Islamophobia report and keeping track on that Islamophobia exists and knowing that we can do something about it, I think that's important. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Back to you, Sadia.
Thank you so much, Anna. You know, that was really thought-provoking. I think a question really that came to me, Anna, whilst you were talking was, we have lots of people who are Muslim who are talking about these issues and have done lots of research, but being a non-Muslim, is there a threat to you, and what's your experience of that? I know, you know, Farid talked about, you know, the kind of experience that he went through in Austria, but for you as a, you know, as somebody who's non-Muslim, what does that mean in a place like Sweden?
Well, I have a bit of a backstory and on internet hate. I was named world's most hated women a few years ago for a completely different story and on rather on feminist issues. And I've had they have researched me for several years and tried to find everything bad about me, and that makes me kind of immune. So I think that's one of the reasons why I can be a spokesperson, because they can't really find anything. They already have their idea of that I'm an Islamist, anti-Semitic, Semitic, lunatic, Christian, feminazi, etc. You know, all the things that they say about you and that they find kind of proofs of. But I already had also a support groups, and I've had the police protection for several years. I have a direct number to police, and I have other safety measures as well around my house. And so, but as I said, the big risk, I think it's not now. I haven't got any death threats in more than a year, I think. I mean, it sounds for people who are not living in this, like the social media, working against the right-wing extremists, it sounds like you shouldn't have ever had a death threat, but I've had quite a few. But that's not how they work anymore. What they threaten me with now, it's actually that they should lock me up, that I should go to trial as a traitor of the country, and that I'm psychologically ill, that they should put me on forced treatments. And I think that, I mean, that's a very common way of getting rid of opponents to authoritarian regimes. So that's actually, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I think it's actually not, since now they are negotiating, the Sweden Democrats or the fascist party. They have 1/5 of the votes, and they're negotiating to be in the government right now. And so that is like, they have their fantasies of what they want to do with people who speak up against Islamophobia. And I hope that they will not get the power to do that. And that because they have 20%, you can't do anything with 20%. But when they get the rest of the conservatives with them, then that when it becomes really dangerous. I mean, we actually, in this report, I'm turning because I'm turning black with the light behind me. So that we are now naming some of the persons that are running this Islamophobia networks that causes quite a stir every time you do that, because they have a lot of help on the internet, anonymous accounts that absolutely attack you. They call your boss. They say that you're a controversial person, and your boss, or I have different bosses, but your boss calls you and say that, oh, this is kind of dangerous things and we don't want to be in controversies. They don't really know what it's about, but it's unpleasant, you know. It becomes unpleasant to talk about these issues. You don't really get to defend yourself. You're just being shut out. You can't really, the platforms are closing if you talk about these issues. You have difficulties to get a job because people don't want to be the controversial platform for you, because they will get contacted. People asking, why are you employing this mentally disturbed witch?
I'm really sorry that you having to go through this, Anna, but I'm pleased that you have a support network, and I really do hope things do improve. You know, and I guess one of the questions I really had was about how
it helps being a non-Muslim. Absolutely.
And also, have things improved from, you know, and I guess this is a question for Farid, probably, from the inception of 2015 to what you've been measuring up to now. What are the things that have changed, and have things improved? And I guess one of the other questions that would be great to be able to answer is around the terminology around Islamophobia. And I know somebody's put it in the chat around, you know, do we call it anti-Muslim hate or do we call it Islamophobia? So I know both of those terms are used. So it would be great just to have a bit of an explanation for the audience around the terms. And, you know, it would be good to understand the kind of, I guess, the pattern or the change or the trend that's from, if there's been a change in terms of that pattern from the start of when you started this report in 2015 to where we are now.
I don't know, Enes, if you want to say something to that, but I can say a few words maybe. Well, first of all, very quickly, in terms of Islamophobia and the terminology, we basically use it interchangeably with anti-Muslim racism. And what we want to emphasize on here is that it is not only a prejudice that is kind of an interpersonal thing, but rather it is a structural phenomenon. Therefore, it is, on the one hand, yes, very much about prejudices on a personal level, but much more so also structuring the whole of the society. And I think the very detailed example that Amani gave in terms of the legislations that are put in place based on these counting of Muslims is a perfect example of that, right? Just like a few words in terms of like how has the landscape changed. I think it has changed tremendously. And I mean, one of the interesting things with our European report was that I think we very much introduced a larger debate on also the east of Europe, because a lot of the debate until 2014-15 was very much concentrated actually on Western Europe. Also because in most, not all, but in most of the Eastern European countries, Muslims are like 0.something% of the whole population. But back then, the influx of refugees coming from Syria has very much pressured maybe some of the centrist right and some of centrist left political leaders to not give any space to any potential far right surge, and therefore they completely co-opted all of the far right political discourse that we knew so much about from Western Europe. If we look at the overall change, I think the examples that have been given by Anna and Amani show very much that it is becoming much more serious. It's becoming much more institutionalized. And I think one of the things, while maybe looking back like 10 to 15 years ago, And Islamophobia in terms of being a political agenda was very much tied to the far right. It is now very much tied to all parts of society. Like no matter if you have a leftist government in place, and Sweden has until recently been governed by a social democratic party, or even if in the case of Austria, you have the Green Party being in a coalition with the Conservative Party. So they are not maybe, those who are the proponents of that kind of policies, they still are sharing some of them with the conservative coalition partner. So we can see that Islamophobia is part and parcel of the central pillars of the policy making in many European nation states today. So I think, yes, in that sense, I would argue things have worsened, which does not mean that, and that's not my implication here, that I would argue that there is nothing to do against it, and that there are also not any forces also within the bureaucracy and the state institutions that would fight it. There is also, that is also like part of the story. But if you ask me about the general trend, I would say things have worsened very, very much. And just to give you like one example, maybe like also, when I told the story about like in 2014, people would say, oh, is there really something like Islamophobia? Where is the evidence? Now the discourse has shifted to, well, if you speak about Islamophobia, you're actually an agent of political Islam. And that has to be criminalized. Like, I mean, just to give you this example of this Operation Luxor, this largest police raid. In the investigation files, if you read that, you will see that the intelligence service, as much as some of the courts have decided that if you speak about Islamophobia, you want to create an Islamic caliphate worldwide. That is like literally, quote unquote, what they are saying, and you can find that in the report. So yeah, I think that is an alarming sign of like how even fighting Islamophobia becomes a criminal act, the way they want to frame that. And and since especially you as the hosts are coming from Britain, I think Britain is very far away from the rest of Europe when it comes to all of these issues. Not saying that Britain is free of all of these troubles, and obviously CVE has made a huge damage to a lot of Muslim life in Britain, but still I think we cannot see that kind of extent to criminalize Muslimness, Muslim visibility, organized Islam, and or critique of Islamophobia. All right. So
Enes, did you want to say something? Have you been on?
Yes, I think with regards to Islamophobia, the term and the discussion around it, I think we have already passed that discussion. There is now a consensus emerging that we define Islamophobia as anti-Muslim racism. So we are talking about racism here. It's not about prejudice. It's not about hate only, but it's racism, and it has different dimensions. It has an institutional dimension. It has a systemic dimension, and as Farid mentioned, the academics who are working on this issue, they are being also criminalized. And we have also, Farid has unfortunately experienced this in a really bad way, that he was the subject of this police raid, and it was a traumatic experience for him and for his family and for his kids. I know them personally as well. But also other authors of our report, they have been threatened by the far-right circles, that threats that they have received in Eastern Europe. So they had to cease their participation in the report. And of course, but it's not only about Eastern Europe, because there is this blame game on Eastern Europe, that authoritarianism is only in Eastern Europe, and the Western Europe is the champion of the democracy, liberal rights, etc. But we had also an author, I am not going to name the country, but from Western Europe, and she has been called by the Interior Ministry, and she was directly said that if she continues participating with the report, she's not going to receive any funds from the state. That was so clear for her, you know. So that these were, I mean, and there were also media campaigns against the report and all these. But I think with time, we have also, not only us, but also all the NGOs like you and the others, they have achieved certain positive signs, positive steps. One of them being that the United Nations was able to, you know, declare 15th of March as the day of, you know, Islamophobia, against Islamophobia. It's very good sign. It's a first step, let's say. But we have also seen Germany has started publishing Islamophobia, data on Islamophobia since 2017, I think, as a separate hate crime category. And also European Union has appointed a coordinator against hatred against. They don't call it Islamophobia. They don't use the terminology. Also, European Council, Council of Europe, sorry, in Strasbourg, they have also appointed a coordinator against Islamophobia. So there are some positive signs, but still, we are, I think, at the beginning of this struggle.
Thank you. Farid?
Yeah, just a very quick note on Abdullah Falek, who had a question. I didn't want to skip that in terms of also our report. Our report for the first 5 years was co-sponsored and supported by a think tank based in Istanbul, which is called SETA, where Enes used to have an affiliation. And actually, the last two reports on 2020 and 2021 have been published by a different institution based in Austria, which I'm part of, alongside the support of several university centers, mainly in the United States, and this year also the first time from Uppsala University in Sweden. So basically, I think that is important because, you know, that wasn't, you know, in the times when there were frictions between Turkey and the European Union, basically starting with 2014, when we decided and had already like this kind of contract to do that work, then obviously Turkey and everything that is happening there was used against this kind of report that we produced, you know. But well, first of all, that's not anymore the case. And secondly, and I think that is the much more important aspect here, I think these kinds of allegations are part of the technique how to you try to criminalize people. You know, because at the end of the day, you know, the authors of this report, so we are not anymore connected to Turkish institutions with the last two editions. You know, everybody has his own mind and speaks for himself and herself. So, you know, trying to frame this as being part and parcel of something, and, you know, trying to frame us as being the speaking tube of the foreign ministry of Turkey is just like a ridiculous argument that people bring. And I think it's very much the same strategy that you see in the criminalization of a lot of Muslim activism. You see that in the case of France, where people are tied to the Muslim Brotherhood. They are said to be Islamist separatism. And there was also this question like about these different notions. Like we see in Germany, they use legalistic Islamism, in Austria, political Islam, in France, Islamist separatism. But all of these are different iterations, basically arguing that, you know, whenever you speak as a Muslim, you cannot speak as an independent human being. You're always part of some kind of conspiracy, you know, and it is basically devaluating what people are doing, you know, insinuating that every author is here part of a large conspiracy. And yeah, I think that we should call it by the name it is. It is a way of trying to basically criminalize this kind of work. That's how I see it. All right.
Thank you very much, Farid, and thank you very much. I suppose a number of people in the room would be quite chilled by some of this, and particularly the Swedish scenario and what Anna has to face. And I just wanted to say on a personal level, our solidarity with you and all your colleagues in terms of facing on an individual basis. I know you face that, Farid, in Austria. On an individual basis, our solidarity and that we're with you, and there are people that are with you, and we're trying to build those networks of support and collaboration that can be with you across Europe, so that we're not overwhelmed, as you say, Anna, by actually quite a small number of people who mobilise hatred and racism against so many different groups.